I hadn't meant to stop by her place that night. I'd only planned on returning the book she lent me, an old paperback with her name scribbled faintly in blue ink on the inside cover. She lived just a few blocks away, above the quiet duplex she owned, and I told myself it would take 5 minutes, maybe less. The street was still damp from an afternoon drizzle. My shoes carried the smell of wet pavement as I climbed her porch steps. She kept a chipped ceramic pot by the door with a plant that never seemed to grow. I hesitated, book in hand, wondering if it would be strange to drop it off so late. Her door opened before I knocked. "You're standing like you're about to break in," she said, voice low and amused. I laughed too quickly. "Just, returning this." I held out the book like proof. Her eyes flicked to the cover, then back at me. "You could have just left it in the mailbox." "I figured you'd want it back in person." That wasn't true, not really. But I'd caught myself reading her handwriting on the inside flap more times than I'd admit, and I wanted her to know I'd noticed. She leaned against the doorway, barefoot, hair a little undone like she hadn't expected company. There was no makeup tonight, no careful presentation. Just her. She looked more real that way, and maybe that's why I couldn't find words right away. "You're dripping on the mat," she finally said, nodding at my shoes. "Oh, sorry." I stepped back, awkwardly shifting the book in my hand. She studied me for a moment too long, like she was deciding something. Then she opened the door wider. "Come in before you catch cold." The room smelled faintly of coffee and rain. A lamp threw a warm circle across the small living room. I stood near the door, not sure if I should sit, not sure why my chest felt tight over something so ordinary. She took the book, brushing her thumb over the cover. "You didn't dog-ear the pages." "Most people do." I didn't want to ruin it." Her mouth curved, not quite a smile, more like she was holding one back. "That's rare." For a moment, silence pressed between us. She flipped the book in her hands, then set it on the counter. I noticed her nails were short, unpainted, the kind you get from working with your hands. "You want some tea?" she asked. I almost said no, almost retreated to the safety of the wet sidewalk, but something in the way she asked made me nod. While she filled the kettle, I let my eyes wander, a half-finished crossword on the table, a folded sweater on the couch, her phone face down by the window. Small evidence of a life lived quietly. I thought about my own place, empty dishes, muted TV reruns, unsent texts to people who wouldn't answer. "You always look like you're somewhere else," she said suddenly, glancing at me from the kitchen. "Do I?" She poured water into 2 mugs. "Yeah. Like you're rehearsing what you want to say but never saying it." I laughed under my breath. "You're probably right." She brought the mugs over, set one in front of me. Her fingers brushed mine, light enough that I could have imagined it. I wanted to ask her why she let me in. I wanted to know if she felt the same pause in her chest that I did. But instead, I stared at the steam rising between us, hoping it carried the questions for me. When I finally left an hour later, the book forgotten on her counter, my phone buzzed before I'd even reached the end of her street. A message from her. "Next time, don't just bring a book." Her text stayed on my phone longer than I'd admit. I kept opening it again, rereading the short line as if it might change its meaning with time. "Next time, don't just bring a book." A week passed before I found myself back on her porch. I told myself I was only there because she'd mentioned her sink was acting up, and I happened to know a thing or two about plumbing. But if I was being honest, I was looking for an excuse. She opened the door before I could knock. This time, she didn't look surprised. "You really came," she said. "You sounded like you needed help." Her smile lingered. "Or maybe you did." The kitchen sink was stubborn. I crouched under the counter with a wrench while she sat nearby, mug in hand. I could feel her watching, not intrusively, but with a kind of quiet curiosity that made my shoulders tense. After a while, she asked, "Do your parents know you rent from me?" "Yeah. Why? She shrugged. Just wondered what they think about you living on your own so young. I tightened the valve. They think I'll come running back in a few months. Will you? The question hung there. I pretended to check the pipes again. I don't know. There was a pause, filled only by the slow drip of the faucet. Then, softly, she said, when I was your age, I couldn't wait to leave home. Thought freedom would solve everything. Turns out, it just makes you realize what you're running from. I glanced at her then. Her eyes weren't on me, but on the steam rising from her mug. I wanted to ask what she'd run from, but the question felt too heavy to hand over. The pipe gave a reluctant groan, then stilled. I stood, wiping my hands on a towel. Fixed, for now. She tilted her head. You're better at this than you admit. I tried to laugh it off. Or maybe your sink just likes me. Something softened in her face, but she didn't say anything. Instead, she reached for the towel, her fingers brushing against mine as she took it. That small contact made the air between us shift. You shouldn't be fixing things for me, she said, but her voice was low, not scolding. Why not? Her eyes finally met mine. Because it's not your responsibility. And because, she trailed off, folding the towel with too much care. Because lines get blurry when you do. I swallowed. My heart pressed hard against my ribs, as if trying to answer for me. We sat in silence after that, the kind where every second feels stretched thin. She set the folded towel down, smoothing it once with her hand. Then she looked at me again, not directly, but sideways, like she was testing the weight of the moment. Thanks, she said, almost a whisper. And before I could answer, she reached up and brushed a stray thread off my shoulder, so small, so ordinary. But her hand lingered just a second too long, and I knew it wasn't really about the thread at all. I tried to act like nothing had shifted, but the thread of that moment, her hand brushing my shoulder, kept tugging at me. The next few days, I found myself glancing at her upstairs window every time I left the house. The lamp was always on late. When she finally texted, it was simple: if you're not busy, I could use help carrying groceries. I told myself it was nothing. Just a favor. But my pulse betrayed me as I climbed the stairs to her door, empty-handed, rehearsing a casual smile. She opened before I knocked, arms folded like she'd been waiting. Bags sat near her feet. Thought I told you to bring mussels, she said. I left them at home, I replied, too quickly. We laughed, but it didn't erase the quiet weight between us. I carried the bags inside. She hovered close, brushing against me more than the narrow hallway required. At the counter, she unpacked slowly. A carton of eggs. Apples. Tea bags. Her hands lingered on each item as though delaying the end of our small excuse to stand there together. You ever notice how quiet this place gets? She asked suddenly. I nodded. Sometimes it feels like the walls are listening. She looked at me, startled, then smiled faintly. That's exactly it. The silence stretched. I could feel it pressing against the edges of what neither of us wanted to say. I shifted the bag toward her. You should, but the door knocked hard. Once. Twice. We froze. She mouthed a word, neighbor. Then she moved quickly, smoothing her hair, composing her face. I stepped back, suddenly aware of how close we'd been standing. She opened the door. A man in his 50s stood there, holding a set of mail. This was in my box. Thought it was yours. Thanks, she said lightly, voice calm, even. I kept my eyes on the counter, pretending to be busy with apples, though I could feel the neighbor's eyes flick toward me. Didn't know you had company, he remarked, not unkind, but not neutral either. Just helping with groceries, she answered too quickly. He nodded, left. The door shut. Silence again, but heavier now. She pressed her palms to the counter. Exhaled. This is, not smart. I swallowed, not sure what to do with my hands. I wasn't trying to, I know. She cut me off, but her voice softened. Still. Her eyes met mine. For a moment, neither of us moved. Her lips parted, just slightly, as if she wanted to say something but didn't trust the sound of it. I took half a step closer. My hand twitched, almost reaching for hers. She didn't pull away. And in that quiet, with the clock ticking far too loud, it felt like we were standing on the edge of something neither of us could undo. Then she turned, slowly, and began putting the apples into a bowl, like nothing had happened. It was a Sunday evening, the kind where the air held on to the last warmth of daylight before the streetlights buzzed on. I found her sitting on the small bench just outside the duplex, a mug cradled in her hands, hair pinned up carelessly. I almost kept walking. But she looked up before I could decide, and there was that flicker in her eyes, the one that said she'd noticed me long before I noticed her. Sit, she said, patting the empty space beside her. I did. The wood was cool through my jeans. We sat there quietly, listening to the faint hum of traffic down the street, the rustle of leaves. You ever think about leaving this place? I asked, surprising myself. She gave a low laugh. Every day. And then I don't. Why not? Her thumb traced the rim of the mug. Because it's easier to stay where people stop expecting things from you. I wanted to tell her I didn't believe that I expected something of her, though I couldn't have named what. Instead, I said nothing, watching the way her hands tightened around the cup. After a while, she turned. You shouldn't be here with me like this. My chest tightened. Why not? You're too young. And she stopped, shaking her head. It's not right. I tried to laugh, though it came out thin. Who decides that? Her eyes met mine, steady now. People do. Neighbors. Friends. My ex-husband, if he heard. She exhaled slowly, voice softening. Your parents. The word parents made the air between us sharper, almost unbearable. I rubbed at the back of my neck, searching for an answer. I don't really care what people think. You should. Do you? That question hung there. I could see it working through her, the way her jaw tensed, her gaze dropped to the ground. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I've cared too much my whole life. That's the problem. We both fell silent. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once and stopped. I wanted to reach for her hand, to steady whatever trembled inside her. Instead, my fingers curled tight against my knees. She turned her face toward me, and in the dim streetlight her expression looked stripped bare, tired, hopeful, afraid, all at once. I don't know what you want from me, she said. The words caught me off guard. My mouth opened, closed. I stared at the ground, at the small cracks in the pavement, and finally muttered, I don't either. I just don't want to stop showing up. She let out a shaky laugh, covering her mouth with her hand. Not mocking, not cruel. Just surprised, like something had cracked open inside her. The silence after that was heavy, but not empty. She set her mug down on the bench between us, hands trembling slightly. For a moment, I thought she would reach across the distance. Instead, she leaned back, closing her eyes. God help me, she whispered. The next few days, I didn't see her light on in the upstairs window. It was strange, she always left it burning late, sometimes past midnight. Now the apartment sat dark, even at 10. I told myself it didn't matter, that I had other things to do, but my evening stretched long and hollow without that faint glow above. Finally, on a Thursday, I heard her door creak open while I was unlocking mine. She stepped out, jacket already on, keys in hand. She stopped when she saw me. Hey, I said, too casual. She gave a small smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Hi. Been quiet up there?" "I've been busy." The pause that followed felt loaded. She was shifting her keys from one hand to the other, restless. "Going somewhere now?" I asked. "Meeting someone," she said. Then quickly added, "My daughter. She's in town for a few days." I blinked. "I didn't know you had kids." Her lips pressed together, almost apologetic. "I don't talk about her much." I wanted to ask why. I wanted to know everything, how old, what their relationship was like, why she sounded like she was explaining instead of sharing. But before I could, she glanced at her watch. I shouldn't keep her waiting. "Of course," I said. She started down the steps, then hesitated. "Don't read into it, okay? If I seem different. Some things are complicated." The words sat heavy. By the time I found a reply, she was already halfway to her car. The weekend passed. I didn't hear from her. No texts, no half-smiles through the window, no excuses to bump into each other. I tried to convince myself not to care, but I caught myself drafting messages I never sent. "You around? Need help with anything? Want company?" Each time, I deleted them before hitting send. By Monday, I couldn't stand it. I went upstairs, book in hand again, the old paperback she'd left on her counter weeks ago. My knuckles hovered over her door, ready to knock. Through the thin wood, I heard her voice. Low, laughing softly. Another voice answered, a younger woman's. Her daughter, I guessed. I stepped back. The sound of their laughter twisted something in me I couldn't name, hope and distance and something sharper. I stood there longer than I should have, gripping the book like an anchor, before retreating down the stairs. My phone stayed silent that night. So did hers. On my table, the book sat untouched, the faint blue ink of her name staring at me like a reminder. I typed one more message before bed, "Did you want this back?" And then I stared at the screen, thumb hovering. I never pressed send. It was raining the night I finally saw her again. Not the heavy kind, just a steady drizzle that made the pavement glow under the streetlights. She was outside, fumbling with an umbrella that refused to open. I crossed the street before I had time to think. "Here," I said, taking it from her hands. The thing snapped open with one quick tug. She exhaled, half amused, half weary. "You make it look easy." We stood there, both under the umbrella now, the air damp and close. I wanted to ask why she hadn't called, why she'd gone quiet, but the words felt too sharp against the softness of that moment. Instead, I said, "You've been busy." She nodded, eyes fixed on the wet ground. "My daughter left yesterday." Silence. Just rain on fabric. When she looked at me again, her face seemed older, more fragile. I shouldn't have let things get like this. The words hit, but not as rejection. More like an admission she'd been carrying too long. I swallowed. "Do you regret it?" Her gaze lingered, searching. "No. That's the problem." For a long time, neither of us spoke. I could feel my heart beat everywhere, ears, chest, throat. I wanted to close the distance, to bridge it with something more than silence. But I also knew a step too far could shatter everything. Finally, she whispered, "You make me forget myself. And that scares me." I shifted the umbrella to my other hand, the fabric dripping, my free hand brushing against hers. "You don't scare me." Her lips parted as if to answer, but no words came. Instead, she let her fingers rest lightly against mine, just the barest contact, like testing the shape of a truth neither of us had dared to touch before. It was nothing. It was everything. She let out a breath that trembled. "This won't last. You know that." "I know," I said. My voice surprised me with its steadiness. "But it doesn't mean it isn't real." Her eyes closed, briefly, as though the weight of that line was almost too much to carry. When she opened them again, there was a softness there, a surrender. "Okay," she whispered. It was the smallest word, but it felt like a door opening, like a fragile thread finally tied. We stood there in the rain, sharing the umbrella, hands barely touching. Neither of us moved to make it more than that. And maybe that was the point. Time has a way of folding itself. 1 month blurred into 2, and somehow we slipped into a rhythm I hadn't expected but also couldn't imagine losing. It wasn't dramatic. No late-night declarations, no stolen kisses under streetlights. Just a slow weaving of our days into each other's. Sometimes I'd find her already sitting on the bench when I came home, a mug in her hands, the same way she'd been that first Sunday. I'd sit beside her, neither of us talking much, just letting the quiet hold us. Other nights, she'd leave the lamp on upstairs until I returned, the glow in the window less like a signal and more like a steady promise. I learned she liked her tea strong, no sugar. She learned I took my coffee black, though she'd tease me by sliding the sugar jar across the table just to watch me shake my head. It was in the small things. Carrying her groceries without needing to be asked. Her leaving the crossword unfinished on the counter, knowing I'd fill in the last few words. The way her hand sometimes brushed mine as we passed the towel in the kitchen, neither of us pulling away anymore. One morning, I caught myself staring at the clock, 8:47 a.m. The same time I'd once stood outside her door, book in hand, too afraid to knock. Now, at 8:47, I was in her kitchen, buttering toast while she leaned against the counter, hair still damp from the shower, scrolling through her phone and humming softly to herself. It felt like the simplest thing in the world, but it landed in my chest with the weight of something permanent. We never had the talk. No lines drawn, no labels assigned. Just the understanding that whatever this was, it was ours. And maybe that was enough. One evening, as we sat on the bench again, the same mug balanced on her knee, she said, almost to herself, "I used to think love had to be louder. That it needed fireworks to count. And now?" I asked. She glanced at me, the corner of her mouth softening into that almost smile I'd learned meant she was telling the truth. "Now I think it just needs to last through the quiet." I didn't answer. I just reached over, covering her hand with mine. She didn't flinch, didn't joke it away. She just let her fingers lace slowly with mine, like they'd been waiting for that shape all along. The streetlight flickered above us, a moth batting against the glass. We sat there until the air cooled and the mug was empty, our hands still joined. And in the stillness, I thought, this is how it begins, and maybe how it lasts, not with a kiss, not with a promise, but with two people who finally stopped pretending they weren't already home.